After the closing arguments, the jury was excused. It was around 4 p.m., so the judge sent them back to their hotel. The trial had been going on for 2 weeks after nearly a year-long investigation. The defendant was sent back to the Tarrant County Corrections Center, and things would stay quiet until the jury reconvened on Monday. Deciding to walk back to my hotel, I stopped at a bar for a beer and a bite. As I was finishing my burger, a woman's voice behind me said, "Hey, cowboy, buy a girl something to drink?" I turned and saw a familiar face. "Ashley? Ashley Marks, is that you?" "Yep, it's me," she replied with a smile. I invited her to sit and called the waitress. "My God, has it been 17 years? How are you?" I asked. "I'm doing okay. I went to college, graduated, got married, divorced, and now I'm a reporter for the Austin Statesman," she said. "Wow, you've been through a lot. What happened?" I asked. She shrugged. "I was married, but he had trouble remembering his vows. After catching him cheating for the 3rd time, I kicked him out. He's managing a McDonald's in Beaumont now," she said. "Sorry to hear that," I said. "So what brings you to Dallas?" "I've been covering the Jenkins trial. I saw you testify. I'm really sorry about Jolene. She didn't deserve that," she said. I stayed silent. Jolene didn't deserve to end like that. I would have preferred something more painful, but that was taken from me by someone I once called a friend. "How are you holding up, Bill Jennings?" she asked. "About as well as can be expected, considering the last 16 years of my life have been a lie," I replied. "At least you have your children," she said. "Yeah, they're legally mine," I said. "You may not be their biological father, but you're their dad in all the ways that matter," she assured me. "I guess you're right, but it doesn't make me feel better," I admitted. "Look, I need to tell you something," she said. "Every reporter wants your story. I'd like to be the one who tells it, if that's okay. I understand you have trust issues, but no one knows you like I do. We can sign a contract. You give me exclusive rights, and I'll protect you from the media. I'll let you review everything before it's published. My editor approved it, and I want to handle this properly," she explained. Deep down, I knew she was right. I had already been bombarded by reporters from major news outlets. CNN, Fox News, the Associated Press, you name it. Even some influential bloggers had reached out. It was all too overwhelming. Something about Ashley made me feel like I could trust her, so I made my decision. "Okay, Ashley," I agreed. "You've got a deal. So how does this work exactly? Do we do this here, in my hotel room, or yours? What's your plan?" "Well," she said, "I've been wanting to visit your hometown for a while now. It's only a couple of hours west of here by car, right? It's still early, and the jury won't start deliberations until Monday morning. We could make it a weekend trip. Why don't we drive out there, and you can show me where everything happened. You can fill me in on the details along the way, and after we arrive, maybe I can talk to your kids and your parents, if that's okay with you." I thought about it for a moment before agreeing. It would be a nice break from the trial, and I thought it might be good to show Ashley around and maybe reconnect with my past. The sun had just dipped below the horizon as we got onto Interstate 20 headed toward Abilene. I was relieved as I hated driving into the sun. Ashley had swapped her professional reporter attire for a knee-length denim skirt and a white Western-style blouse. She looked just as attractive to me now as she did back in school. I couldn't help noticing her shapely legs, which stirred a familiar feeling below my belt. She noticed my glance. "I know what you're thinking, cowboy," she said. "Oh, really?" I asked. "You're probably thinking, why didn't I choose Ashley instead of Jolene?" she teased. I chuckled. "Your reporter instincts picked up on that?" I asked. "No, the way you're checking out my legs did, just like you used to back in school," she teased back. "Bet you thought I forgot about that." "Well, legs like yours are hard to forget," I admitted. I always enjoyed admiring her legs, especially when she wore that cheerleader uniform back then. She smiled and pulled out her recorder. "So tell me, Ashley, is there a Mr. Right waiting for you in Austin?" I asked. "No," she replied. "After my divorce, I focused mostly on work. You can imagine I've had my share of trust issues with men, and so far, I haven't met anyone worth my time." "Sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. She laughed. "I doubt that," she joked. "Anyway, shall we get this road trip started?" "Yeah, sure," I agreed. She placed her recorder on the dashboard to record our conversation. "You don't mind if I record this, do you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not at all," I assured her. "I want you to get it right." I took a sip of coffee and collected my thoughts before continuing. "You know, Ashley, it's funny how life unfolds. Back in school, you, Steve, Jolene, and I were thick as thieves. But after you moved away, it was mostly just us three hanging out. I popped the question to Jolene right after we graduated, and she was all in. Steve and I enlisted in the Marines together, ended up in boot camp down in San Diego, even shared a platoon. The plan was to marry Jolene after I wrapped up my advanced training. Meanwhile, Steve landed an infantry gig at Camp Pendleton, but I got sent to Quantico for computer electronics training. Not long after, Steve wrecked his knee and got medically discharged. Yeah, you can still see him limp when he walks. When you asked if they couldn't just give him a desk job, nope, it doesn't work that way. In the Corps, everyone's a rifleman first. Even us tech guys have to meet those combat standards. Post-discharge, Steve went back home. His dad, you remember, the county commissioner, pulled some strings to get him a county job. That's how Steve drifted into politics after his old man passed. Seems like the voters had enough respect for his dad to give him a shot. As for me, I finished my training, came back, and Jolene and I tied the knot. Steve was right there as my best man. Turns out he was a bit more to Jolene too, if you catch my drift. Fast forward a bit, we're on the West Coast and Brian's born, right about 9 months post-wedding. After my stint in Okinawa, I parked Jolene and Brian at my grandparents' place to keep them close to family while I was away. When I finally returned stateside, we moved to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. That's when Jessica came along. Jolene had a rough go of it, pushed me into getting a vasectomy, claiming it's reversible. Looking at the photos now, you mentioned seeing Steve's features in the kids. Honestly, people used to say Steve and I could have been brothers, so at first it didn't strike me odd. They looked a lot like me as toddlers, but as they grew, more of Steve seemed to show up. I'll pull out the baby pictures once we're back home. Ended my service, started at my dad's computer shop. Lots of travel, but Jolene never minded, said it was good for business. Gave her plenty of opportunities to sneak Steve around right into our bed. Found that out the hard way. Yeah, that's why I torched the bed and mattress after she passed. Couldn't stand the sight of it. Even burned Steve's recliner and Jolene's wedding dress. Steve was practically living at our place, had his own recliner. Seemed innocuous back then. He'd come over, watch a game after church, fall asleep right there. The kids even called him Uncle Steve. Jolene's doing, of course. Bugged me at the time, now it all makes too much sense. I had no idea Jolene was cheating with Steve all those years. She never disrespected me to my face, and there were no signs of their intimacy. They were very careful. About a year ago, I went to Los Angeles for a month-long training. Jolene and the kids kept in touch daily. One weekend, Brian emailed me a picture from their fishing trip. Brian was holding up a big fish, with Steve next to him, and Jolene touching Steve's shoulder. They looked so much alike, even the dimples, and I noticed Jolene wasn't wearing her rings. Later, I found a picture Jessica took of my wedding ring and great-grandmother's engagement ring in an ashtray on my nightstand, along with Steve's cigarette butts. Jessica had seen the rings before they left, took a picture, and sent it to me. I told her to take the rings out and mail them to me. Jolene went crazy searching for those rings, even getting Steve to help. I arrived home and she met me outside, crying about the lost rings. I pulled them out of my pocket and she looked like she might faint. I told her a trusted friend found them and sent them to me, and next time Steve came over, she shouldn't leave the rings in the ashtray. At that point, I knew it was over but needed solid evidence. I got DNA tests done to find out if the kids were mine and installed cameras. I got samples from the kids, making sure they didn't tell their mom. I took my own sample and waited until the next Sunday when Steve came over. As usual, he dozed off in that recliner of his, so I quietly swabbed the inside of his cheek. The DNA test showed a 99.9% likelihood that Steve was the father of both children. Looking back, maybe I could have pieced it together if I really thought about it, but she never gave me any reason to doubt her faithfulness before then. I waited to gather more evidence and got my first video proof a week after installing the surveillance equipment. I had to go to Oklahoma City for a couple of days, leaving Jolene alone. She called Steve and arranged for him to come over. I checked in from my hotel, and after that call, I logged into my home server. Sure enough, around 9 p.m., they were in our bed having closeness. What really pissed me off was that he didn't use a protection. Seeing them like that was bad enough, but hearing what they said was worse. As it got dark, I had to focus on driving since the road had no lights or guardrails. This road was near where Steve's drug-dealing associates used to operate, and even though most were arrested after Steve was caught, I stayed vigilant. I switched on the high beams, turned on the light bar, activated the police scanner and CB radio, and grabbed my pistol. I wasn't taking any chances. Okay, finally we arrived at my house. Ashley noticed the DPS car in the driveway. I explained it was security. They've been watching the place since Steve's arrest because some of his buddies tried to retaliate. I assured her we had round-the-clock protection and invited her inside. I brewed some coffee and gave Ashley a quick tour. The house, originally built in 1866 by my ancestor, had been expanded and updated over the years. I offered Ashley the master bedroom, but she insisted I take it and she would sleep on the futon in my office where I'd been staying since discovering Jolene's affair. She said the bed was big enough for both of us and we could control ourselves. I agreed. I suggested calling the kids to let them know we'd be there tomorrow. After arranging lunch with them, I fetched us some coffee and noticed a stack of DVDs. These should help explain a lot, I told her. She was surprised by how much video footage I had. I admitted there was a fair amount from around the house and surveillance cameras in my office. I'd scanned all documents and had plenty of pictures and audio recordings, making multiple copies for safety. I selected a disc and inserted it into the DVD player. Fair warning, this is pretty graphic, I said. Ashley said she was ready. The video showed Jolene entering the master bedroom with Steve. They engaged in foreplay, undressing each other. Jolene took off her rings and tossed them into the ashtray on my nightstand. Steve extinguished his cigarette on them, smirking. "Screw him and his great-grandmother's ring," Jolene remarked. Steve chuckled. Ashley winced, tears welling in her eyes. Ashley covered her eyes. It was clearly too much for her. I fast-forwarded through the explicit parts, which Ashley seemed grateful for. I finally reached the part after their closeness. They lay on their backs, smoking. Steve again used Jolene's rings as an ashtray. Jolene turned to face Steve. "I'm pregnant again, babe. Looks like you're going to be a dad again," she said. Steve scowled. "Damn it, didn't you take your pills?" he asked. "Yeah, I missed a day here and there, but mostly I did." "Why can't you use a protection?" "I hate protection," he replied. "You know the deal. No rubbers. I guess you'll have to get another termination. Or convince Loser it's his baby." "I can't do another termination, Steve," she said. "I've had 3 already, and the last one almost ended me. I got so sick I ended up in the ER. Besides, you know this loser had a vasectomy after Jessica was born. You thought that would ensure he never got me pregnant." "What do you want to do then?" Steve asked. "I want to leave him and marry you," she said. "That's all I've ever wanted. And I think Bill's onto us anyway." "I've told you I'm not the marrying type. Plus, having a family could complicate things, and I like things the way they are now. Bill works and pays, and I reap the rewards," he said. "And don't worry about him figuring anything out. He's so freaking clueless we could screw right in front of him, and he wouldn't know." "Can't you just, deal with him like you did those other guys?" she asked. Well, those other guys were all illegal immigrants anyway. No one would care about them. Plus, who's going to mourn for some shady drug runners who are in the country illegally? Heck, by getting rid of them, I probably secured half the voting bloc. It's one thing to eliminate an unknown illegal immigrant. It's another to target a respected member of the community. "Maybe we can arrange for an accident," Jolene suggested. "It wouldn't be the first time. And you know people get destroyed driving down Indian Trail all the time. The people who crash there are usually tourists looking for scenery, and they don't know the road like he does. Maybe there's something we can do, but let's not rush into ending him just yet. Perhaps we can find a way to take him out slowly, like using poison. Let's think it over before settling on a plan. Eventually, we'll have to get rid of him, but let's do it carefully and at the right time, maybe after the kids are out of the house. That way, you can get his insurance money and a good part of his business. In the meantime, go to that new clinic in Abilene. They'll take better care of you than the place you went to last time. I'll keep an eye on Billy Boy. If it looks like he's going to do something stupid like see a lawyer, I'll talk to him and set him straight. Sound good?" Jolene nodded. "All right, baby, I'll do it. You're the man," she said, kissing his face. Jolene turned, straddled Steve, and began to have closeness with him. I stopped the video. Ashley was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "I hate that woman," she said. "And you stayed with her for 17 years? Please tell me you saw a lawyer after that." "I did see a lawyer. It was quite a day. Let me tell you about it," I said, starting to explain. Indeed, I had consulted a lawyer. As I told Ashley, I made an appointment with Alan Jackson, the attorney who had handled all our family's legal matters for years. What I discovered during that meeting chilled me to the bone. I recounted my visit to Alan's office. After greetings, I presented the DNA results and video of Jolene's affair with Steve. Alan explained that while Texas allows divorce on grounds of adultery or cruelty, the real issue was Steve's control over the county and its judges. Since Texas requires filing for divorce in the county where you've lived for the past 90 days, no judge here would entertain my case. Additionally, Jolene's pregnancy could delay proceedings until the baby is born. Alan revealed that Steve had instructed him to inform him of any divorce attempts. Shocked, I asked if Steve had actually instructed him to violate attorney-client privilege. Alan admitted he had no choice. I fired him immediately and demanded all related files. Alan had anticipated this and had everything ready. He urged me to contact the authorities about Steve's activities and hoped we could mend fences later. Firing him didn't worry me. My main concern was Steve's potential retaliation. I called the contacts Alan provided, a family law attorney, a state prosecutor, and a senior Texas Ranger, all based in Dallas. Then I informed Dad about letting Alan go and explained Alan's warning with the DNA and video proof. Dad was shocked and realized we needed to get the kids out of there quickly. He had a plan. I would tell Jolene that Dad was sending me to Phoenix for a site survey, which would keep me away for a few days. Meanwhile, Dad would help me get the kids to stay with my parents. This ruse would buy us some time. We also discussed informing the kids. I felt they deserved to know the truth without bad-mouthing their mom. Dad reassured me that I was doing the right thing and promised full support from him and Mom. A few minutes later, my secretary called me. "Bill, Steve Jenkins is here to see you," she said. I took my pistol out of its holster and placed it on my desk within easy reach. I started the video recorder to document our meeting and asked my secretary to let my father know Steve was here. Steve strolled into the office like he owned the place and immediately spotted the 9mm pistol on my desk. "Nice piece of hardware you got there," he said. "Didn't know computer guys packed heat." "What do you want, Steve?" I asked. "Straight to the point. Good," he replied. "Look, I know you went to see Alan Jackson today." "So? What's it to you?" I asked. "If you're thinking about divorcing Jolene, forget it," he said firmly. "I don't care if you know about us, but I won't let you drag me through court." "Tell me, Steve, why? I thought we were friends. Why did you and Jolene do this? How long has it been happening?" "How long?" He chuckled. "That's a good one. You'll love this. We started up back at our senior prom. Remember that? Ashley was my date, but Jolene and I sneaked off and hooked up. You were dancing with Ashley when we got back, right? We were all 18 then, so it wasn't like we were breaking any laws. We got back together while you were in Quantico," he continued. "Remember when I messed up my knee at Pendleton? We were at it pretty often until you returned. Jolene was on birth control, but I guess she forgot to take it the day you two got married." "You were my best man, you jerk," I said. "I was hers too," he admitted. I have to say, seeing her walk down the aisle was a thrill. She looked stunning. Even better, I knew she was carrying my load the whole time. That's why I had that grin. And guess what? 9 months later, Brian was born. How about that? "We took a break until you brought her home on leave before heading to Okinawa," Steve went on. "Yeah, Jolene and I had a grand old time, nearly every night while you were away. She got pregnant about 6 months in and had a termination. Didn't want you coming home to a pregnant wife? Damn, I even banged her the day your plane touched down. And lo and behold, 9 months later, Jessica came into the world," he smirked. "It was my suggestion to have Jolene push you into getting a vasectomy. We didn't want her having any of your children. It seemed like it would be too complicated keeping track of whose kid belonged to whom. Jolene messed up a few times over the years and had to go for terminations. Good thing your insurance covers them. We had a good arrangement going all these years until you decided to wise up. You couldn't just let it be. No, you had to get all self-righteous and upset. So here's how it's going to be now that you know about us. There's no need for a divorce and no need for us to hide anything anymore. I'll be coming over whenever I want from now on, day or night. When I'm there, I'll be with Jolene in your bed, on your couch, wherever I want. If you're in bed, I'll kick you out and take over. If you're already with her, tough luck. And when I'm there, remember that I'm in charge of this house. You'll do what I say, when I say it, and how I say it. If I want you to watch while I'm with Jolene and clean up afterward, you'll do it, and you'll enjoy it. And if you even think about trying to stop me, just remember the kids. I'd hate to see anything bad happen to them. You know, kids are getting hurt all the time these days." "You bastard," I said. "You lay a finger on those kids and I'll take you out like the rabid dog you are. I don't care if it's the last thing I ever do." "Talk crap all you want," Steve said. "Just remember who's in charge here. Hell, I own this freaking county. I own the sheriff's department and I own every goddamn judge at the courthouse. And now I own you. You play ball and things will be just fine. You step out of line and it's lights out. For you and the kids." I asked, "What the heck happened to you?" "I grew up," Steve said. "And you'd better grow up as well. See you around." Steve left the office and I stopped the recording. I burned it to DVD, sent a copy of the video to my father and my contacts in Dallas, and called my dad. "Dad, check your email. We need to act fast," I said. "He just threatened me and the kids." "Okay," Dad replied. "Let me make a call. You call Brian, have him pick up Jess, and head to my house. Notify the school, and I'll meet you there. It's time to remove your wife." I agreed and called the school, instructing them not to allow my wife or Steve Jenkins near the children or the premises, stressing it was urgent. I told Brian to pick up Jess immediately and go straight to Grandpa's house without delay. "I'll explain everything to you later today, I promise," I assured him. "And you must not contact your mom or Steve under any circumstances. This is very important. Do you understand?" I grabbed my tool and the newly burned DVD, left the office, and hopped into my truck. Knowing Dad would soon be on his way, I didn't waste time. If he said he'd be somewhere, he'd be there. I pulled out and drove straight home. About 15 minutes later, I arrived at my house. Steve's truck wasn't in sight, but Jolene's car was there. Good. I knew Dad would arrive soon. Entering cautiously, I scanned for Steve or any potential threats. I kept my hand near my holstered pistol. At first, I didn't see or hear anyone. Taking a tentative step inside, Jolene appeared at the top of the stairs. "Bill, you're back early," she greeted me. "Is everything all right?" I looked at her without responding immediately. "Is Steve or anyone else here?" I asked. "Why would Steve be here?" she replied innocently. "You know exactly why Steve might be here. Maybe for a little afternoon rendezvous or to plan my demise," I retorted. Jolene's eyes widened and she instinctively covered her mouth. "Yes, Jolene, I know." "My God," she exclaimed. "I'm sorry." "Bullcrap. Let me show you what your lover just told me. Then you've got 30 seconds to grab your stuff and get out of my house," I retorted. I inserted the DVD into the player, turned on the TV, and hit play on the remote. I closely observed Jolene's reaction to Steve's confession and his threat. "Bill, it's not what you think," she pleaded. "Please let me explain. Steve was just talking nonsense. We can work this out." "Are you kidding me? You conspired with Steve from the start to cheat on me. Then you conspired to prevent me from having kids, and now you're involved in his threats to end me. What kind of people are you? Get your stuff and get out of here right now." Damn it. I had never yelled at her like that before, but she was visibly scared. I grabbed her left hand, removed her rings, pocketed my grandmother's ring, took off my own, and shoved it into her hand. "Take it," I said harshly. "Bill, please don't do this to me. I'm sorry," she whimpered through tears. "Yeah, you're sorry, all right. You're a sorry excuse for a wife. Now get out of here." I grabbed her purse and threw it at her chest, urging her toward the door. "Move, damn it," I ordered. Though I wanted to kick her out, I was raised never to hit a woman. We reached outside, walking to her car. She turned back to me as she opened her door. "Where will I go?" she asked, sobbing. "First, stop crying. This is what you wanted. Second, I don't care. Go to Steve's, your mom's, or better yet, go to hell." As I said this, I noticed 2 vehicles approaching the driveway. Dad's truck arrived first, followed by Steve's. Jolene stopped crying instantly and smirked at me. "Now we'll see who's leaving, babe," she said sarcastically. "It would have been easier if you just cooperated. Now, you and the kids will be begging us to end it by the time we're done." "Would you really end me and the kids?" I questioned. "In a heartbeat," she replied callously, "and I'll relish every moment of it. Don't worry, we'll give you all a good show before we start carving you up." Dad maneuvered his truck to block Steve's access to the house and halted. Steve abruptly stopped his truck, narrowly avoiding collision with Dad's vehicle. Both men leaped out of their trucks. Dad grabbed his 12-gauge and aimed it at Steve. "What the heck do you think you're doing, Jennings?" Steve yelled. "I'm enforcing the restraining order," my dad replied. "What restraining order?" Steve demanded. "The one against you and your lover. It says you both have to stay 500 feet away from my family and our property," Dad explained. "And let me tell you, I'd love nothing more than to blow your head off right now. So get back in your truck and get out of here." Steve, unused to such direct confrontation, halted in his tracks. 2 vehicles with flashing lights pulled into the driveway, stopping behind Steve's truck. 4 state DPS officers stepped out, tools drawn. "We'll take it from here, Mr. Jennings," one officer said, approaching Steve. Dad lowered his magnum as the officer served Steve with the restraining order. "Is that her?" the officer asked, nodding toward Jolene. Dad shook his head. The officer walked over to Jolene and handed her a document. "Mrs. Jennings, you've been served with an order to stay 500 feet away from any member of the Jennings family and any property controlled by the Jennings Historic Family Trust, including this home," he informed her. "If you disobey this order, you'll be arrested. Understand? Yes, Jolene replied quietly. Excuse me, officer, I interjected as he turned away. He stopped and faced me. Yes, Mr. Jennings, he inquired. I pulled out a digital audio recorder from my shirt pocket. I'd like you to take Jolene and Mr. Jenkins into custody, I requested. Why's that? He asked. I played back the recording, letting them hear Jolene's threat against me and the kids. Jolene looked on the verge of tears. The officer scrutinized her sternly before retrieving his handcuffs. Mrs. Jennings, you're under arrest. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he instructed. After cuffing Jolene and reading her rights, he radioed another officer to arrest Steve. You'll pay for this, a-hole, Jolene spat as she was led away in cuffs. All of you will pay. Meanwhile, another vehicle arrived in the driveway. A local news van had pulled up and a reporter followed by a camera crew approached as Steve was being arrested. They captured footage of his arrest, which made it onto the evening news. Steve was furious, to say the least. Do you know who I am? He demanded of the state officer, putting handcuffs on him. Yes, sir, I do, the officer replied. And frankly, I don't care. You're still under arrest. I'll have your badge for this, Steve yelled, his face red with anger. I realized I should have mentioned their plot to off me and the kids, but I didn't have that evidence with me. Part of it was still in the DVD player at home, and things were moving quickly. However, I knew my contacts in Dallas had the evidence and were working on pressing charges. The news van backed up to allow the patrol cars to leave the driveway. The reporter and her cameraman approached me with my dad close behind. Mr. Jennings, can you explain why Commissioner Jenkins was just arrested? She asked. Yes, I can, I replied. Last time I checked, it's still a crime to threaten ending, and even influential politicians like Steve and his married girlfriend are accountable under the law. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to attend to my children. I walked away, and Dad joined me, leaving the reporter and cameraman visibly shocked. Steve was well regarded by voters in our county, and I knew his image as a family values advocate had just taken a serious hit. Unfortunately, the voters didn't know the real Steve like I did, but I was determined to make sure they did. My next stop was my parents' house, where I would explain everything to what remained of my family. Telling my children that the man they knew as Uncle Steve was actually their biological father was heart-wrenching. But I felt they deserved the truth, backed by DNA test results. At first, they struggled to accept it. I don't care what that piece of paper says, Jessica insisted. You're my dad, and you always will be. I agree, Brian chimed in. I felt so proud of them, despite Steve being their biological father. We shared a group hug and shed some tears. After tearful goodbyes to the kids and my parents, I returned home, gathered enough essentials for a few days, and headed to Dallas. And that's when you realized how serious things had become? Ashley interjected, as I paused to take another sip of coffee. Yeah, I nodded, continuing my story after a moment. The next day, I met with Dave Brooks, a tough Dallas attorney. To my surprise, the other two men I had contacted, John Hancock and Don Jacobs, were also there. John explained they had substantial evidence against Steve Jenkins, including involvement in pills and Magnum trade, and at least ending of 6 people. Jolene was also deeply involved, particularly in the escort. Due to threats against my family, they had to act quickly. Don, a Texas Rangers captain, informed me that the sheriff's department was compromised and couldn't be trusted. They were temporarily replacing it with Rangers and DPS officers. Dave then discussed the divorce. He planned to pursue an annulment due to Jolene's criminal actions. If that wasn't possible, we'd go with grounds of adultery and mental cruelty. He was confident I'd retain my assets and gain custody of the children. We discussed strategy for about an hour. Dave gave me a DVD with explicit videos of Jolene's activities, involving several men, including sheriff's deputies. John outlined his plan to prosecute Steve and Jolene, aiming for the death penalty for Steve and life without parole for Jolene. He warned us to be cautious, as our lives were at risk. They gave me their direct numbers for any suspicious activity. On the drive home, my mind raced. Steve, once my best friend, was a criminal, and Jolene was deeply involved. Reflecting on the past 17 years, I couldn't believe how blind I had been. When I finally reached town, my son called in a panic. Dad, you have to come home right now, Brian urged. What's going on? I asked. Just hurry home, now. I pressed the accelerator and reached home in 20 minutes. Ambulances and DPS patrol cars were outside, confirming my worst fears. I hurried to the door as paramedics wheeled out a gurney. I stopped them to find out what happened. A paramedic lifted a corner of the sheet, revealing Jolene's face. I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings, the paramedic said softly. She didn't make it. Strangely, I didn't feel the expected surge of grief. I went inside to see Steve being wheeled out on another gurney. His shoulder was hurt badly from a magnum, but he was alive, groaning in pain. My kids and father stood to the side, thankfully unharmed. What happened? I asked, turning to my father. I brought the kids here to grab a few things, he explained. We were inside when those two showed up. I guess they made bail. Jessica and Jolene got into an argument, and Steve pulled a Colt. I heard the commotion, entered through the back, and grabbed my magnum. Just as Steve aimed his tool, I did it. Jolene tried to intervene, but Steve accidentally hit in the abdomen. I hit Steve's shoulder and called 911. Brian called you right after. Jolene passed away quickly. I'm sorry, son, my father said. I shook my head. It's okay, Dad, I replied. You did what you had to do. That's when I remembered the security system was still running on the home server. I checked and found the entire incident recorded. I showed the video to one officer while another took statements from my dad and the kids. The officer asked for a copy, so I made one. Pausing my story, I took another sip of coffee. Do you have that video here? Ashley asked. As a matter of fact, I do, I said, grabbing it from the stack. I inserted it into the DVD player and pressed play. The video showed Jolene and Steve entering the house through the front door. Shortly after, Jessica appeared. What are you two doing here? Jessica demanded. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be in jail. We made bail, Jolene replied. And we're here to take you kids with us. You're coming with us. I'm not going anywhere with either of you, Jessica retorted. You need to leave now. Jolene grabbed Jessica's wrist. Oh, yes, you are, young lady. You and your brother are coming with us now, she insisted. Jessica resisted and broke free. No way! I hate you and I'm not going anywhere with you, she shouted. Jolene slapped her hard. Oh, yes, you are, she insisted. I've got a nice room ready for you in Abilene. You're going, and you're doing what I say, Jessica retaliated, striking her mother in the face. Not happening, she declared. Enraged, Jolene grabbed Jessica's arms. Oh, but it will, she said. You're going to be our new star. Isn't that right, Steve? Steve smirked and replied, The guys are going to love you, kid. They laughed as Jessica realized their intentions. She struggled harder and broke free. I'm not going, and you can't force me, she stated firmly. Now get away from me. Steve drew a pistol from his belt and waved it as he threatened. Well, then it looks like it's lights out for you and your brother. Jolene turned to Steve and tried to convince him while Jessica screamed for her grandfather. Wait, Steve, remember our plan? Let's take them to that spot by Indian Trail where they won't be found. You know the place, she urged. Steve angrily shook his head. No, he insisted. I want that wimp of yours to watch me with her before I finish her off. Jolene became more aggravated. Steve, put the tool down before something goes wrong. We'll deal with them, but not here. We have to stick to the plan, she pleaded. I paused the DVD at that moment. That's when Brian called me, he recounted. You pretty much know the rest from there. Ashley wiped her tears as I got up, saying I needed a smoke. She empathized, sharing her experience with a cheating husband, and said she'd always be there for me. Ashley admitted she'd wished we'd gotten together in school. I told her I'd thought the same, but we laughed, realizing how different things might have been. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon. Ashley had prepared a big breakfast. We ate, and Ashley outlined the day's plans, visiting my family, talking to Jolene's mother, and stopping by the cemetery. In less than a day, I felt myself falling for her again. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The next morning, we headed to my parents' house, where the kids were excited to see us. After introductions, Ashley expressed her wish to speak privately with each family member. My dad and I talked sports in the den while she took her time with Jessica and then Brian. Outside, Ashley joined the kids and me for a lively game of touch football, which we all enjoyed until lunch called us in. Afterward, as we prepared to leave, Jessica playfully warned me about not missing my chance to propose to Ashley. On the drive, Ashley explained her method of interviewing everyone separately, aiming for candid responses. She then shared some concerning news about Steve's inappropriate behavior towards Jessica, which infuriated me, but also mentioned how much my family cared and respected me, echoing their suspicions about Jolene's actions. We then visited Myrna, Jolene's mother, where Ashley opted out of a private interview, suggesting that Myrna and I needed to discuss matters together. Upon arrival, Myrna welcomed us warmly. I'm managing Bill. Thanks for asking, she replied. She hugged Ashley and gave her a once-over. Ashley Marks, you're just as lovely now as you were in high school. Thanks for coming out to see an old woman. Ashley smiled as Myrna gestured for us to sit. So, what brings you here? She asked. I explained why Ashley was visiting, and Myrna nodded in approval. So, what can I tell you? She asked. Well, Mrs. Carter, I'm curious about something. This affair between Jolene and Steve lasted throughout her marriage to Bill. You must have known about it. I'm wondering why you never said anything to Bill. Myrna looked down before answering, seeming embarrassed. Yes, I knew, she admitted. I'm sorry, Bill. I should have told you. You didn't deserve what they did to you. How long did you know? I asked. Almost from the beginning, she confessed. Remember that year you spent in Okinawa? Steve practically lived with Jolene that whole time. They were careful to keep him away when your parents were around. I told her she was making a huge mistake, but she wouldn't listen to me. So, I began, if Jolene wanted to be with Steve so badly, why did she marry me? I would have let her go if she had just said she wanted to be with him. She was confused, Bill. She loved both of you, but in different ways. To her, you were stable, dependable, a good husband and father. Steve, though, he didn't want any part of family life. He was always wild and free, not looking to settle down. You were her anchor, and he was her taste of excitement. I'm sorry, Myrna, I said. Jolene slept with Steve on our wedding day, had 2 children with him, and passed them off as mine. She even plotted to end us all. Those aren't the actions of a loving wife. I know it's hard to believe, Bill, Myrna said softly. But she did love you, at least in the beginning. That's what she told me. So what changed? Ashley asked. What caused Jolene to change so much? Well, Ashley, people change over time, Myrna reflected. Steve had a hold on Jolene, and before long, he was controlling her. I mentioned it to her once, and she warned me that if I ever told you, I'd regret it. Myrna looked directly at me. That's why I stopped coming to visit the kids, Bill. I'm sorry, but I couldn't bring myself to come over knowing what Jolene was up to. I was afraid I'd say something that would upset them. They scared me sometimes. Did you know about her terminations? Ashley asked. Myrna nodded. Yes, I did. Jolene told me about them. I warned her it was risky and she might get caught, but she didn't care. She said it was her decision and you had no say. I suggested she should divorce you, but she laughed it off. She said she'd inherit everything from you eventually. How long ago was that? Ashley asked. I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, Myrna replied. We let that sink in for a moment. So, Jolene and Steve had been planning to harm me for a long time. I wanted to say something, Bill, but I was scared. You know how intimidating Steve could be. I knew. Something bothered me about all of this, so I asked. Myrna, did your husband know about all this? I inquired. I think he did, she said. He and Steve had words shortly before the accident. Myrna's husband was known as one of the best mechanics in the area, and he took excellent care of his vehicles. Investigators called the accident a fluke, but they couldn't explain how one brake line mysteriously failed and how a tie rod mysteriously got loose. I guess that's all in the past now, right? Myrna said. I don't blame you and the kids for not coming to the memorial service, especially after what Jolene did to you. I had hoped some of her old friends would show up, but it was just me and the minister, she added, wiping a tear. Thank you, though, Bill, for covering the cremation costs. I thought it was interesting that you had her cremated in her wedding dress. I thought maybe Jessica would have wanted it. Ashley looked at me. You cremated her in her wedding dress? Really? Why? I told you I burned her wedding dress. I just didn't tell you she was wearing it at the time. I made sure she had on the wedding ring I gave her too. Honestly, I thought it was fitting. She had no use for our marriage anymore, so a final bit of revenge, I see. Did you cremate her wedding ring too? Ashley asked. But not the engagement ring. I nodded. She seemed somewhat amused as she took notes. Anyway, Myrna said, I want to thank you for making sure I got Jolene's IRA. It really helped, being on a fixed income and all. Jolene had an IRA? Ashley asked. Yeah, I replied. She had about $350,000 in it when she passed. I didn't even know she had it back then. There was another $200,000 in a savings account I didn't know about either. I set that aside in a trust fund for the kids' college. I have no idea how she managed it, and honestly, I don't really want to know. Interesting, Ashley remarked, jotting down notes in her pad. She turned to Myrna. Mrs. Carter, is there anything else you can add? Myrna shook her head. Nothing else that stands out right now. I think you both know just about everything. Myrna glanced at me. I'm so sorry things turned out the way they did, Bill. I hugged her. It's okay, Myrna. Feel free to come by and see the kids anytime you want, okay? They'd love to see you. She nodded gratefully and thanked me before giving Ashley a hug. Thanks for coming, she said as we prepared to leave. And please, stay in touch, okay? We promised we would and departed. As Ashley focused on her notes during our drive to the cemetery, we navigated the paths until we reached the columbarium holding Jolene's ashes. The simple granite marker bore her name, Jolene Carter, with birth and death years etched beneath, devoid of sentimentality. I explained that since Jolene had severed ties with our family in life, it felt unnecessary for her to carry our surname in death. Initially, the cemetery suggested a more sentimental inscription, like loving wife and mother, but I opted for simplicity. After Ashley took photos, she turned to me, placing a comforting hand on my chest. Sensing my lingering anger, she gently asked if I had ever truly mourned Jolene. The truth was stark. I hadn't. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I admitted everything I had believed about her was a lie. Ashley held me in silence, offering solace. Finally, as the sobs subsided, we decided on Charlie's for dinner, known for its steaks and live music. Playfully, Ashley teased me about asking her out in front of Jolene's ashes. Home felt different now. Not just a place to sleep, but a sanctuary with Ashley by my side. I went through my evening routine while Ashley got ready. During a slow song, Ashley stopped and kissed me passionately, confessing her love. I realized I was falling for her too. I love you too, Ashley Marks, I said. She looked at me with anticipation. Take me home and make love to me, she whispered. Afterwards, lying beside her, I realized how fast things were moving. But looking at her, I knew I didn't want it any other way. I never want this to end, I admitted. Me neither, Ashley replied. She asked about our future, her reporter instincts showing. That's when I retrieved my great-grandmother's ring, a symbol of my family's history and my love for Ashley. As Ashley looked at the ring, I explained its significance. Tears welled up in her eyes, moved by its history and what it meant to me. Yes, she said softly. To both. I'll marry you and promise to spend my life making you the happiest man alive. I would be honored to wear your great-grandmother's ring. But there's one condition. A condition? I asked. Yes, she nodded. Promise me you'll get your vasectomy reversed. I want to have a house full of children with you. Maybe one day we'll pass this ring on to our grandchildren. The next morning, after breakfast, we packed up for our return to Dallas. I called the kids, putting the phone on speaker so Ashley could hear their excited reactions about our upcoming marriage. My dad warmly welcomed Ashley to the family as Pop, and Ashley graciously thanked him. She explained to my mom that we needed to wrap things up in Austin before setting a wedding date. As we loaded the truck, Ashley's job prospects in Austin lingered in my mind. She had applied for a managing editor position at the Daily Record, showing promise given her experience and their interest. She joked about moving closer to me if things didn't work out, emphasizing her desire for stability and being in one place. Before leaving, I stopped to pick a few flowers from the front garden. I explained, I was thinking about what you said at the cemetery. It's time to start moving forward. We drove to the cemetery and parked near where Jolene's ashes were kept. Stepping out of the truck, we walked over to the marker. I knelt down and placed the flowers in a vase next to it. By the way, Jolene, Ashley and I are getting married. Thought you might like to know, I said aloud. Yes, I knew she was deceased, but saying it out loud felt oddly therapeutic. Ashley stood beside me and added her words. If the kids are okay with it, I plan to adopt them, she declared. After saying our farewells, we returned to the truck. Do you really want to adopt the children? I asked. Absolutely, Ashley affirmed. They deserve a trustworthy mother. Are you okay with that? Sure, I replied. At that moment, I was certain that marrying Ashley was the right choice for all of us. I believed she would be an amazing mother, especially for Jessica during her teenage years. We drove back to Dallas mostly in silence, Ashley occupied with her work on the story. She seemed deeply engaged in it, and I had plenty of time to think over the events of the past few months. Upon arriving at the hotel, we grabbed our bags. You know, Ashley suggested, there's no need for you to keep your room. The paper's covering mine until this is over. So why don't you stay with me? I'll be working on my stories, but we'll have plenty of time together afterward. I liked the idea and agreed. Let me at least contribute to the expenses, I insisted. She waved off my offer. You can cover our dates, okay? She teased. It was settled. I checked out of my room and moved in with Ashley. That evening, we went out for dinner, danced a bit, and ended up back in bed for another passionate night together. The next morning, we made it to the courthouse early to secure good seats. The jury was brought in from the hotel and began deliberating immediately. Ashley fulfilled her role as a reporter, gathering statements from lawyers on both sides and discussing with other observers and legal experts. The jury reached a quick decision. By 1:30, news spread that the jury was ready to deliver their verdict to the judge. Steve remained stoic as the jury filed in. The judge took his seat and inquired about the jury's decision. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman confirmed, handing a slip of paper to a bailiff. The judge reviewed it before turning to the foreman. "Is this a unanimous decision?" he asked, to which the foreman affirmed. "Very well," the judge stated. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge requested. Steve and his lawyer stood up. "In the case of the People versus Steve Jenkins, the jury finds the defendant Jenkins guilty on all charges and unanimously recommends the maximum penalty allowed by law, which is death," the judge announced. Steve's lawyer had opted for the jury to decide the penalty upon a guilty verdict, believing it might lead to a lesser sentence than death if unanimity was not reached. It was a gamble and one that Steve lost. Steve had been convicted of 6 counts of first-degree ending, numerous conspiracy charges for ending, and a range of other offenses, including smuggling, human trafficking, pills trade, and escort. The defense requested each juror to confirm their agreement with the verdict, which the judge allowed. One by one, all 12 jurors affirmed their agreement on both the guilt and the punishment. "Mr. Jenkins, personally, I'm not a supporter of the death penalty, but I fully endorse the jury's decision. If there ever was a case that warranted the death penalty, this is it. I hereby order you to be taken from this court and delivered to the state prison at Huntsville, where you will be executed in accordance with the law at the earliest possible time. May God have mercy on your soul," declared the judge, slamming his gavel. My lawyer motioned for me to follow him, and we caught up with the officers escorting Steve out of the courtroom. He spoke briefly with them, and they nodded while glancing in my direction. Steve looked up at me, his eyes red, his posture stooped like an elderly man. "What are you staring at, a-hole?" he snapped. "Right now I'm looking at a worthless piece of crap," I replied. "I always wondered what one looked like. Now I know." My lawyer handed Steve 2 documents and instructed him to sign them. "What the hell is this?" Steve demanded. "What's this crap?" "One is a document relinquishing all parental rights to Brian and Jessica Jennings, and the other details how your assets will be distributed after your execution. Essentially, it's a will stating that what remains of your estate after taxes and penalties will be sold off and divided into 3 parts. 1/3 goes to Myrna Carter, the mother of your longtime lover, 1/3 to Brian Jennings Trust Fund, and 1/3 to Jessica Jennings Trust Fund," my lawyer explained. Steve appeared furious but realized he had been defeated. He glared at me with hatred in his eyes. "Happy now?" he sneered. "I will be," I replied. "By the way, Ashley Marks and I are getting married, and she's agreed to adopt the kids. Enjoy hell, a-hole. I look forward to pissing on your grave." My lawyer thanked the officers, and we departed. I didn't see Steve again until the day of his execution. And yes, I did urinate on his grave, but I made sure Ashley wasn't present. I didn't think she'd approve. Finally, the ordeal was over, and I eagerly anticipated a new chapter in my life with Ashley. Ashley kept her promise and let me read the story she wrote about me, and I was really impressed. The story became hugely popular, leading Ashley to appear on several talk shows to discuss the whole dramatic ordeal. She was even offered a chance to make a movie about it, but she eventually declined. However, she did win a Pulitzer Prize for her work. The Statesman was sad to see her leave, but they understood that her life was moving in a different direction. They gave her a generous bonus and a strong recommendation when she decided to move on. The board of the Daily Record eagerly hired her as their new managing editor. Under her leadership, the paper's circulation tripled in the first year, prompting the company to expand and hire more staff. Both of us agreed that we didn't want a big church wedding, so we got married in our backyard and invited our family and friends. Ashley's parents came up from Austin, along with a couple of her close friends from the Statesman. Her father proudly walked her down the aisle and warmly shook my hand as he gave her away. Brian was my best man, and Jessica served as Ashley's maid of honor, making our wedding a real family affair. After we exchanged vows, the minister asked everyone to turn and face the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce for the first time Mr. and Mrs. William Jennings and family," he announced, which was met with enthusiastic applause. Brian walked over to Ashley and gave her a hug. "Welcome to the family, Mom," he said, smiling. Ashley hugged him back, tears of happiness in her eyes. Jessica also hugged Ashley. I love you, Mom, Jessica said. I love you too, Ashley replied, embracing both kids. My dad came over and hugged both of us before reaching into his pocket. I hope you two enjoy your honeymoon, he said, pulling out an envelope with 2 tickets for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Thanks, Pop, Ashley and I said almost simultaneously. And so our new adventure began. 10 months after we returned from our cruise, Ashley gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. We named the boy William Frederick after my grandfather and the girl Alicia Marie after Ashley's grandmother. On the day they were born, I happened to run into George Mason, a prominent local politician. He shook my hand as he accepted the celebratory cigar I offered him. Congratulations, Bill, he told me. I expressed my gratitude. By the way, he continued, you know we have elections coming up soon. Some of us think you'd be a shoo-in for Steve's old commission seat if you're interested. After all, you're the guy who finally took him down. Sort of like our own version of the man who shot Liberty Valance, huh? I joked. He chuckled. Except John Wayne wasn't lurking in the shadows this time, he quipped. Thanks, but I don't think I could handle the pay cut. I've got 2 new mouths to feed now, I explained. You could still run your business, right? He inquired. Is there another reason? Well, yeah, actually, I replied. It's something my dad mentioned last time we discussed this whole mess with Steve. What's that? George asked. Power corrupts, I answered.